All right, so we're gonna finish up our series on Ahab, Elijah, Ahab, Jezebel, and Elijah, and we're gonna take a look at kind of two big storylines. One, Elijah confronts Baal and Jezebel's whole crew, and then Elijah is being pursued by Jezebel, and he just kind of freaks out and takes off. He's in fear of his life. And so we'll take a look at that. But just a reminder very quickly, in the ancient world, as we've talked about, a king or queen was semi-divine. So it wasn't, you're not just dealing with Jezebel, the person. You're dealing with, like, Jezebel, the goddess. And she was big into Baal, as we know. She was the daughter of a king of Tyre, Sidon. And she also was a priestess. So she was very high up in the whole Baal, worship. In fact, she had prophets and prophetesses eating at her table. So she was very close to these people. And she was kind of running the show when it came to the religion of Baal. And so you have this massive confrontation between the followers of Yahweh, who Elijah is the spokesman of, and Jezebel, and really the whole social and political apparatus of Israel at this time. And so, you can understand Elijah's hesitancy, right, sometimes, to kind of get involved in this. But he's very bold. He confronts Ahab straight to his face. But once Jezebel sent him a message like, I'm going to kill you tomorrow, he got really scared. It's interesting because he had no problem confronting Ahab, because I think he knew Ahab was kind of a soft guy, kind of weak, as we're going to find out. But Jezebel didn't have any of those qualities. She wasn't afraid of Elijah, of God, or anybody. She was going to have her will done, or she was going to die trying. So anyways, Jezebel is living a life of opulence. Samaria, archaeologists tell us that Samaria was really a very opulent city, a lot of marble, a lot of granite. And so, this was another thing, too, that, the prophets of God were always instructing the people and the leaders of, you've forgotten about the poor. You're oppressing the poor. You sit upon your beds, Hosea says, and you think up more and more evil to oppress my people. And so the idolatry was one thing, but the oppression of the less fortunate in Israel was also another. And so both of those things were abominations to God. It wasn't just the idol worship. It was what the idol worship brought into Israelite society. This idea of a small group of people lording it over everybody else and not caring about the weak, not caring about the widow and the fatherless, as the Old Testament tells us constantly in the law. It talks about that. You can't forget about the fatherless and the widow. They were the most vulnerable of society. Okay, let's take a look then. Very quickly, because I want to get through this. And there is no multimedia presentation. Lisa, I know you're upset about that. Everybody is, actually. Sharon's going to leave. No multimedia presentation. It's outrageous. All right. 1 Kings 18. There has been a drought, remember, for 3 years. No rain. And we talked about, too, what happened to babies in Phoenician society when there was no rain, or a severe, catastrophe of some kind. Well, we know that they were sacrificed. The Phoenicians practiced child sacrifice, particularly during harsh, difficult times, and this would be one of those things. You had drought, and they would absolutely, in times of distress, would offer a child in order to appease Baal. So this was another thing that it was an abomination to God. He said, it never even entered into my mind to have this type of thing happen. But here we are, right? The chosen people of God who were to be separate They were to be a holy people, distinct, God says. They're doing the same craziness of all the people around them, offering up their children as a sacrifice. Awful. Okay, so we're not going to go through all of this, but in chapter 18, and it came to pass after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, so 3 years of drought. Go show thyself unto Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. And Elijah went to show himself unto Ahab, and there was a sore famine in Samaria. We know what happens when there's no rain in this area. You know, you have a small river of Jordan that you could do some cultivation with that if you were close to Jordan, but the majority of Israel relies upon rainfall. And if you don't, it gets a limited amount of rainfall as it is, and if that rainfall kind of drops off, you will absolutely have a famine, particularly in the ancient world. A lot of these people are, you know, their whole life is dependent upon that harvest. Their whole life is dependent upon enough rain. These are things that we are so far removed from. You know, we're not dependent upon, you know, rain or good growing seasons. It just shows up in our supermarkets, right, in our own minds. We're not close to the land. Maybe some of you are. Jason might be a farmer, right? You got a vineyard over in Israel? All right. So, major problem. Now, let's take a look at this. And Ahab called Obadiah, which was the governor of his house. Now, Obadiah feared the Lord greatly. And it was so, when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, that Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50 in a cave and fed them with bread and water. And so Ahab tells Obadiah in verse 5, go into the land and all fountains of water and unto all brooks, peradventure we may find grass to save the horses and mules alive, that we lose not all the beasts. So this is how drastic and how severe this drought was. They were searching the land high and low, looking for some grassland in order to feed the animals. That's how close it was to complete devastation. And Obadiah, in the midst of this, he's the governor of Ahab's house. Think about this. You know, the Bible says that of all the kings of the north in Israel, Ahab did more wickedly than them all. And in his house you had Obadiah, a believer of God. He was a faithful believer of God, and he's got to deal with this guy on an intimate level. Governor of the house, you had complete control. He was a very powerful man. He ran the show inside of Ahab's house. Almost like, I want to say, like a Secretary of State situation, where, you know, you had the king. The king didn't want to be bothered with day-to-day things going on in his house and in the government. He only wanted the big things or things he was interested in. And so Obadiah is going to be taking care of all of these things. And on top of that, Jezebel, who he knew intimately as well, he was in the house. He finds out that Yahweh's prophets are going to be killed. And some of them were, a lot of them were. And so this was before the confrontation with Baal and God on Mount Carmel. So we think about, like, why did God allow all these Baal prophets to be killed? Well, number one, they were Baal prophets. They hated God. But number two, you could make the argument that Jezebel started this religious war by killing the prophets of God before. But Obadiah is trying to hide these people. They hide them in caves. So what a stressful time for Obadiah. You have a faithful guy dealing with Ahab and Jezebel in their own house. He has all this responsibility. He's got to go find grassland for horses and for mules and beasts, so they're going to die. Lot on his plate. And so, when we sometimes think that we get overwhelmed with our duties and our responsibilities, and sometimes we do. But Obadiah remained faithful even though he was in a pretty stressful situation. Like, how would we handle that situation? We're dealing with the wickedest king ever in Israel. Every day, here comes Ahab and Jezebel, these two, and you're like, disgusting. But you got to deal with them. So listen, there's things in our lives too that we do not care to do. We don't like, at work, maybe we don't like a certain person, whatever. Monday morning, I know I'm going in and I got to deal with kids' attendance. Right? I got to call them down. You're tardy, you're late, this, that, and the other. Do I like it? No, but it's necessary. We have to do it. And so Obadiah is one of these very quiet individuals that just goes about his job in Scripture, right? When we think about faithful individuals, Obadiah, anyways, in my mind, doesn't pop up like, oh yeah, Obadiah. But when you think about it, what a tremendous statement of his faith. His life was on the line, brothers and sisters, every single day. But he knew that these prophets had to be protected. You know, where was the bread and water coming from, too? They were looking for water. It was a time of famine. So he's taking this bread and water from whom? Ahab's household, right? Didn't even know. All right. So, you know, this is one of these things they meet. Ahab calls Elijah the trouble. He goes, the troubler of Israel. But, you know, Elijah has this great retort. I'm not troubling Israel. You and your house are troubling Israel. This is your fault. And so, again, you see the boldness of Elijah here when confronting Ahab. I just find it interesting that once Jezebel got involved, like, he sent a message. Jezebel sent a message to Elijah and said, by this time tomorrow you're going to be dead. And so that really freaked Elijah out. All right, anyways. Elijah then, proposes a contest on Mount Carmel. He's going to take on 400 prophets of Baal. And, there were also 400 prophetesses of Ashtaroth as well. Remember, the majority of these prophetesses were sacred prostitutes. So you've got child sacrifice, you've got Baal worship. Part of Baal worship has to do with child sacrifice, but also sexual immorality as well. So it was all one big pile of ball of stuff that God did not like. And so we have this massive confrontation now on Mount Carmel, up in the north. And I'm gonna paraphrase this chapter. But the prophets of Baal get up, they're dancing, they're doing their thing, they're cutting themselves, right, to make their blood flow. Very common in some of these cultic ritual practices, the cutting of the flesh. In order to, the shedding of blood, that type of thing. The more blood you would shed, the more fanatical you would become. Certain sects of Islam practice this as well. They will, at certain times of the year, they'll make cuts on their foreheads to make themselves bleed, also in the back. They'll flog themselves, that type of thing. Like Opus Dei as well from the Catholic Church. They're into mortifying the flesh anyways, and they'll flog themselves. Some of them did anyways, but that's frowned upon in the Catholic Church. But anyways, some people still do that. Anyways, massive confrontation. Elijah, as this thing goes on, hour after hour, and they're dancing, cutting themselves, whatever. Elijah starts mocking them, saying, "Hey, is Baal on a far journey? He can't hear you." He starts making fun of them and mocking them. And so at the end of all of this, Elijah says to God, calls upon God to show them a sign, and fire comes down and consumes all of the sacrifice and all of the water too. All of the water that was there. So you have, you're at a time of famine and drought. I always found it interesting that Elijah takes all of this water and kind of saturates the altar, right? Kind of just making the point that, even all of this water cannot prevent the glory of God or the fire of God coming down from heaven. And so all the people say, okay, we're following Yahweh now, we're following God. And all of the prophets of Baal are killed upon Mount Carmel. So this gets back, obviously, to Jezebel, and she goes crazy. Let's take a look at it. Let's see. In verse 41, and Elijah said to Ahab, "Get thee up, eat and drink, for there is a sound of the abundance of rain." Now just keep this in mind, brothers and sisters, that Elijah tells Ahab, "Get thee up, eat and drink." In other words, you need to you need to strengthen yourself. Okay, there's a storm coming. There's a lot of things happening. You need nutrients. Okay, eat and drink. I think Ahab had times in his life where he just got like bummed out, maybe depression or something like that, and he wouldn't eat and drink during these times, like with Naboth's vineyard. Remember, he couldn't get his way, and so he was just being a sad sack everywhere, and Jezebel was like, "What's your problem?" So I think he did have these bouts of depression, and that he would just withdraw himself and not converse or eat and drink. So Ahab went up to eat and drink, and Elijah went up to the top of Mount Carmel, and he cast himself down upon the earth and put his face between his knees. And 7 times this happens, and so then the rain finally comes. All right, now let's look at 19. And Elijah, right, he has all of this energy, and he's faster than the chariot of Ahab, which makes sense because the chariot most likely was getting stuck in the mud from the rain, that type of thing. So Elijah's just like chariots of fire. All right. Chapter 19, and Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and wherewithal how he had slain all the prophets with the sword. Then you can just imagine that confrontation. How was your day, honey? So Jezebel's reaction is she sends a messenger to Elijah. So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. So she makes a sacred vow. This is a sacred vow, and in the ancient world, this was like the most important vow you could make. She makes a sacred vow to all of the gods and says, by this time tomorrow, you're going to be like one of the dead Baal prophets. And so, what does it say? Did Elijah go, can't touch me. Can't touch me, Jezebel. What does it says? Verse 3, and when he saw that, he arose and went for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongeth to Judah, and left his servant there. Now let's talk about how scared Elijah was of Jezebel. He's up in the top of Mount Carmel. Okay? He flees. He runs away all the way down to the most southern point of Judah. He's out of Israel. He goes all the way down like 200 miles. It's about 200 miles from Mount Carmel all the way down to Beersheba. Okay? He's running for his life. He thought he was dead. He goes down to Beersheba, but he doesn't stop there, brothers and sisters. He continues on. He continues on to Mount Horeb, which is Mount Sinai. So it's like Elijah is going back in time to when the children of Israel are just getting to know God at Mount Sinai, and the law is given. Think about how far they had fallen from this time. But Elijah is going back. 40 days and 40 nights even. He's staying. There's that symmetry, right? Elijah's in the wilderness now for 40 days. The children of Israel for 40 years were in the wilderness. Christ is driven by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Okay? There's all this symbology coming together. All right? Now, Elijah is at the end of his rope. Okay? And we're going to take a look at some of these lessons. I think this 19th chapter is really wonderful. It would make a great exhortation, but we're going to talk about this. Because Elijah, a prophet of God, had an intimate relationship with God. He was his prophet. He was his mouthpiece. But yet, this event terrified him. He was terrified of Jezebel. And he flees to the southern point. It's kind of like, it's different, but it's kind of the same. Like when Jonah took the ships of Tarshish to go as far away as possible, from Nineveh, because God said, we know the story. He wants to go the furthest away. Listen, if God wants something to happen, it's going to happen. And so Elijah still had a job to do. He didn't want the job anymore. I'm done. I'm retiring. God said, nah, I still have stuff for you to do. All right, so
But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. Okay, so he walked a day's journey from Beersheba. He's walking to go to Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai. And he sat down under a juniper tree. And we requested for himself that he might die. And said, "It is enough now, O Lord. Take away my life, for I am not better than my father." He just had an incredible high in his life when the fire of God comes down and God, Yahweh, shows his people that I am truly God. I mean, what an awesome time. That would have been great to see. And Israel, it sounds like, turns back to Yahweh. And now you're at a high, and now Elijah is just plummeted to the depths of despair, to the point where he goes, I'm out. I can't do it anymore. Just take my life right now, Lord. I'm not better than my fathers. I'm nothing. Like, he's depressed. Okay? Listen, we've all been there with our faith. Okay? We can face discouragement that hurts us inside. Spiritual highs, we can get, crashed down to emotional lows. That's life. It's up and down. We can feel exhaustion, fear. We can feel worthless in these situations. Elijah felt worthless in this situation. I'm no better than my fathers. But here's the thing. What does God do? God prioritizes physical rest and nourishment. Okay, that's interesting. Verse 5, and as he lay and slept, he was exhausted, obviously. So, we joke, there's great commercial, Snicker bars, hangry, right? You're hangry, you give him the Snicker bar and you're back to normal, okay? Elijah is exhausted. His mind is emotionally exhausted. He hasn't had enough to eat and drink. So what happens? God what? Behold, there an angel touched him and said unto him, arise and eat. So this is, God intervenes, sends one of his angels to Elijah and says, hey, come on, buddy, you gotta have something to eat, drink something, get your nourishment, get your spirit back. And I think we need to be mindful of this, brothers and sisters, in our lives. We need to take care of ourselves. We're getting enough to eat. What's our diet like? Are we doing our readings? Are we praying? What's that like? We think about the needs of our physical body, but we have other needs. We have spiritual needs that we need to nourish. And are we nourishing our bodies and our mind? We can get burned out. Both of those things can get burned out. We all have responsibilities. So it starts with self-care. And Elijah needed a little self-care. And the angel of God gave him that, cooked him up a little meal, right? What does it say there? And he did eat and drink, and he laid down again, He took himself a little nap. He was exhausted. And so the angel of the Lord came and touched him the second time. Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee. He recognized it, right? And sometimes we have to recognize it in each other that, hey, is Brother Rich struggling with something? He seems off, okay? We need to be angels to each other, helping each other out. Elijah was a great prophet. He was awesome. He was one of the great prophets of God. He needed help. He needed encouragement. He needed to be strengthened. He needed an angel to touch him twice. We all need that, brothers and sisters. There's no shame in it whatsoever. None. All right. I like this honest prayer invites God's gentle response. And Elijah gave an honest prayer to God. I've had enough, God. I'm no better than my fathers. I've been talking about how bad my fathers were. I'm no better than them. He just went for like a 200-mile jaunt. He was pretty tired. So, he's saying a lot of things. But we should pour out these things to God. We should be open and honest with God. God knows what we need. We're told that. But there's a certain therapeutic therapy when it comes to speaking your innermost desires to God, your emotions to God, your sadnesses, your joys. When we become joyful, do we praise God? We think about prayer oftentimes in the negative, like I got to pray to God because, I'm going through this, that, and the other. Do we just pray to God for all the great blessings and stuff, the graces that He's given us every single day? Every single day. Are we grateful? And so in verse 9, and he came thither unto a cave, and lodged there, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said unto him, What are you doing here, Elijah? It's the still small voice of God, right? The earthquake, the fire, all of those things. God was not there. He was in the still small voice. And so can we hear God's voice in our lives? Or is it dinned out with the noise of the world, with the craziness of the world? Do we allow ourselves to find spiritual quiet, solitude? Not total isolation, but solitude. There is a place in our lives for solitude in prayer. Christ did it a bunch, right? How many times does it say, like in Mark and Luke, after he had this maybe a big confrontation, he was healing thousands of people? What does it say? And he went off to a mountain alone to pray. And so even Jesus needed that alone time. So let's build it into our lives. Solitude in prayer. Not isolation, solitude in prayer. Sorry, I can't make it. I can't have any interaction, solitude in prayer. We're not monks and we're not nuns. We have to interact with each other. That's part of it. That's part of the process. Elijah had to interact with Ahab. Obadiah had to interact with Ahab in a very difficult situation. It happens, okay? We're not always going to see dramatic signs of God's influence and power in our lives. It's oftentimes the quietness of God. But looking back, afterward looking back on an incident in our lives, man, oh man, can you say, wow, God was. But I couldn't see it. I was blinded by my own fear. I was blinded by my own crazy thoughts. I couldn't see God's hand in my life at that time. But you're like, you look back on something like 2 or 3 years later, you're far away from it, and you're like, man, how come I didn't see that? I don't know. How come we don't see anything? We're morons sometimes. That's the way it is. Chris, you had a question, comment?
Would like to make comments, and yes, I would.
Okay, go.
Yeah, and I really appreciate it. Sometimes when someone's out front like you are giving a class like this, it opens up so many verses for you. So when thinking of Elijah, first starting with the words to Abraham, in the mountain of the Lord it shall be seen, I will provide. And so I'm thinking of the fire and the water, the spirit and the water, and of course the evaporation of that water, and the next thing Elijah sees is a small cloud on the horizon coming. So little types of the resurrection. But I'm thinking specifically of the verse that connects to that. Jesus came with the fire and the water, or the spirit and the water and the blood. And, and that's the difference where God will provide, and He would provide that sacrifice that would go all the way to death, where Elijah is kind of thinking that that's what's his ultimate fate, and that he has to give that great act of just giving himself at this point, and in the still small voice saying, "No, I will provide that."
Yes.
Okay. So.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, great connections. Yeah, I like that too. When he saw, he saw a cloud in the sky no bigger than a man's fist, right? And then it filled the whole sky. It reminds me of, the rock made without hands, and it's going to completely destroy all the kingdoms of men and then fill the world. So, yes. Okay. And so, let's see. Where am I? Beep up, beep up. Yeah, okay, so verse 14. This is what Elijah says to God. I have been very jealous for the Lord God of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thine altars, and slain thy prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. That's another prayer. It's another honest prayer by Elijah as he saw things. They don't care about you anymore, God. I love you. I'm jealous for you. Israel has forsaken you, torn down your altars. They hate you. They're worshiping Baal. I'm the only one left. It's called the Elijah syndrome, brothers and sisters, thinking you're the only one left doing the will of God. Wasn't true. We know Obadiah was doing the will of God in the midst of hostility in the household of Ahab. He was still doing the will of God. And so, that's an honest prayer Elijah gives. He was wrong, but it was honest. He wasn't deceiving himself. Sometimes we can deceive ourselves, right? God talks about that. I think Paul talks about that, actually. He says, be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man sows, so shall he reap. Very powerful verse. And I think it speaks to Elijah as well. Because God says this. First of all, he tells him, he's like, look, you have two big jobs to do. You got to, Elisha, you got to anoint him the next prophet, and you've got to anoint Jehu as the next king. He is going to be the vessel of my vengeance against Ahab and Ahab and Jezebel. So he still had a job to do. And God's saying, I still need you. You got to go. He's got to go all the way back up north, by the way, because that's where Jehu was. All right. And so this is what God says to Elijah, and he says it to us as well. I have left me 7,000 in Israel, all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal, and every mouth which hath not kissed him. And so God tells Elijah, hey, I got my people. Now, is 7,000 like a very specific number, like there was actually 7,000 in Israel? I don't believe so. I think 7,000 is it's a number with obviously special significance, a complete group of people, a small complete group of people that was still living the law. They still loved God. Paul picks up on this too, where he talks about, early day Christians. Same type of thing. I've reserved unto myself 7,000 who have not kissed his Baal nor kissed his image. So God has his people, brothers and sisters, and we should never think that we're the only ones that have it all figured out. We're the only ones living the truth. It's a very boastful thing to say. And we have to watch our pride sometimes, right? Thinking we have all of the answers. Thinking we are doing everything exactly right. And let's make sure that we are caring for ourselves and loving ourselves. And listen for God's whisper in our lives. He does a lot of whispering, and we got to get quiet. All right, a couple more things on this. At our lowest point, we can think about this in our lives. We can meditate and reflect on this. At our lowest, angelic or unexpected help arrives. 100% has happened in my life. I don't know about the angel part, but 100% God has provided unexpectedly in my life. God supplies strength for the 2 great journeys ahead. We're going to have journeys ahead, brothers and sisters. Old, young, we're going to have struggles. We're going to have temptations. We're going to have sadnesses. We're going to have tough times. Okay, we all will have those things in our lives. And Christ talks about this. He says, in this life, you will have trouble. But be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. And so that's what we have to rely on. We have to rely on God. We have to rely on the goodness and the blessings of God. God has reserved unto himself 7,000. And that's the question we should ask ourselves. Are we part of that 7,000? Or are we doing our own thing? All right, last thing we're going to look at. This is really where Jezebel shines in all her glory. This has to do with Naboth's vineyard. And in 1 Kings 21, tells us, and it came to pass after these things that Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard, which was in Jezreel, hard by the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. It's a pretty good piece of land. It was a vineyard. It was well-producing piece of land. And it was right by Ahab's house. I think he wanted to make a garden of herbs. He had different plans for it. Yeah, verse 2, give me that vineyard that I may have it for a garden of herbs, because it is near unto my house, and I will give thee for it a better vineyard than it, or if it seem good unto thee, I will give thee the worth of it in money. And Naboth says, well, I can't do this. This is my inheritance. My father gave this to me, and his father, and so on and so forth. This has been in my family for hundreds and hundreds of years. I can't sell it to you. It's my family inheritance. And so Ahab, what happens? And Ahab came into his house heavy and displeased because of the word that Naboth had spoken to him. And he laid him down upon his bed and turned away his face and would eat no bread. He's got a real Eeyore situation here. Remember Winnie the Pooh and Eeyore? Eeyore always had the cloud around him, right? He could never catch a break. Everything, he always saw everything in a negative way. My mother called me Eeyore a few times. Didn't care for it. So Ahab's bummed out. He can't have this thing, and so he's isolated himself, right? He's laying on his bed. He's depressed. He didn't get his way. And he's not eating bread. You see that? He's not eating bread. He would eat no bread. Okay? Too upset. Can't get the vineyard. Now Jezebel makes an appearance. Verse 5. Why is your spirit so sad that you're not eating anything? She asks. Ahab gives the story. I want the vineyard. And won't give me the vineyard. Jezebel's like, do you not govern the kingdom of Israel? Aren't you the king of Israel? You can have whatever you want. Get up. I'll help you get the vineyard. And so what does she do? False witnesses against Naboth, right? Perversion of the law of God to get her own way. She was smart enough and cunning enough to know the law. She didn't follow the law, but she knew the law. And she used the law against a righteous individual. And this was like, that was it. The line was crossed there. And let's take a look at, Elijah lays into Ahab. Verse 24, him that dieth of Ahab in the city, the dog shall eat, and him that dieth in the field shall the fowls of the air eat. But there was none like unto Ahab, which did sell himself to work wickedness in the sight of the Lord, whom Jezebel his wife stirred up. And he did very abominably in following idols, according to all things as did the Amorites, whom the Lord cast out before the children of Israel. Now here's verse 27, very interesting. And it came to pass when Ahab heard these words that he rent his clothes and put sackcloth on his face, on his flesh, and fasted, and lay in sackcloth and went softly. So these words, brothers and sisters, had an effect upon Ahab. Had no effect on Jezebel. Zero. And so I think there was this tension in Ahab. Like, he could be manipulated very easily, it sounds like. He wasn't a very strong king. He could be manipulated. Jezebel was like the power behind the throne. It's interesting that the Word of God uses the word to sell. He sold himself to wickedness and to abominations. In other words, there could have been another path. He could have been a good king. But he chose Baal and he chose his wife Jezebel to do all kinds of wickedness. And so God, in seeing Ahab humble himself, what does it say? I will not bring the evil in his days. Okay, so all of this prophecy of evil and destruction, because Ahab humbled himself, delayed the destruction that was coming on his house. Didn't stop it, merely delayed it. And so Jehu, who we talked about, Elijah had anointed him, overthrew Joram, who was the son of Ahab and Jeroboam. Jezebel. So at the end, her death, it says she painted herself. And so she painted herself most likely like a goddess. Okay? We see these statues from thousands and thousands of years ago, and they're just like stone, they're worn down stone, that type of thing. That wasn't the case at all when they worshiped them. They were brightly adorned with a lot of colors. A lot of times they put clothes on them as well. It was a representation of an actual god that they believed in. So here is Jezebel painting herself up as a goddess. Ashtaroth or Ishtar, one of these great ancient goddesses. And so she couldn't believe, Jehu was trying to overthrow her. I'm a goddess. I'm running the show. And who was it that pushed her out, right? People from her own household. What does it say there? They push her. I think the two of the eunuchs push her out of the window. And so, that's interesting. Obadiah was there. Were there other followers, secret followers of Yahweh in the household of Ahab and Jezebel? And so, she is pushed out by people in her own household, and that's a great question, to think about. Were these people followers of Yahweh and they saw their chance? Don't know. Or they were just tired of Jezebel's wickedness and evil. But that's how she ends. She ends being tossed out of a window, and dogs are always looked at. We love dogs. Our society does, but in the ancient Middle East, dogs weren't pets. Okay, they were like scavengers. They were looked down upon, particularly in Jewish society. Unclean. They were always eating dead things, and so this was the end of Jezebel. They ate everything, leaving only her skull, feet, and hands. Right, the thinking, the doing, and the walking. Great lesson.